Hi everyone, welcome. Over here in the corner of my wormery is a bin which has red wigglers living in it. Red wigglers that have been fed only non-frozen foods for quite some time now. Very shortly after the launch of the system, we might have given them a few frozen meals, but early on we decided we're going to make this the system that gets fed not frozen foods. So before we get started, I thought I'd share a few bits of info about the system with you. The system's been in service for 245 days now, that's 35 weeks, and fed 20 times overall, 17 of which were non-frozen. So first 3 feedings might have been frozen, but I can confirm for sure that the last 17 feedings have all been non-frozen foods. 12 days have passed since we last checked in on this system, and for a while we were really having a tough time locating the cork that we knew was in here but had been evading us for the longest time. So I'm going to get this system up on the bench, and I've also got a little something I'd like to do when we get there. So let's regroup over there and we're going to get started. So before giving them this delicious meal, which also includes the seed from a mango, a seed which I took a knife to cut a bunch of slits into to see if it would help with the breakdown. I mean, yeah, the system is almost 250 days of age, so chances are that that seed's going to outlive the lifespan of this system. It'll probably get harvested and the seed will probably still be intact and go with the worms to their new home. But what I wanted to do prior to getting in here to feeding these little guys was to follow through on a suggestion made by one of the viewers. And you know who it is. I think you're going to know exactly who you are when I go in here and I extract the cork so that we can take a closer look at it. Yeah, it's Anne over at Plant Obsessed. She's already brought the suggestion up twice, and I believe the most recent time she suggested it was when we finally bumped into it in a recent check-in after we'd been searching and searching and searching for the longest time, never managing to find it. But now I've been taking care to position it in a place where it's bound to get found the next time, right smack in the middle of the feeding zone. And my idea was to do exactly what Anne had suggested, which is to come in with my spray and see if we could rinse off some of the gook that's attached to it, so that maybe we can get a closer look at how this thing's actually doing. I mean, I tried to go through my records in my spreadsheet once a while back to make some annotations based on the review of a bunch of older videos where I was trying to track this thing back to the very first time it was placed into a system. And if I'm not mistaken, the time... Man, I'll tell you, this thing is really haggard. It almost makes me question whether I'm dealing with the right object here or not, but this is definitely the cork. It just seems like a very good portion of it from this side is gone. I don't know. I'm assuming at this point that I must have scraped it off. It's hard to imagine that it would have just been nibbled away by the worms, but I could be mistaken. But I mean, I'll admit, at first I thought I had a piece of little corn cob bit here in my hand, not the cork. It's just incredible how it has actually gradually deteriorated. And I would almost have to guess that chunks are breaking loose from it and falling off and probably getting broken down gradually over time. It's kind of hard to imagine that if it has the ability to come apart like this, that it wouldn't just continue to deteriorate. But I mean, 5+ years floating around in various worm bins of mine, it clearly speaks to the endurance of a cork, even in a fairly harsh environment. So I'll just include it with our feeding when we get around to giving these little guys their next meal. So right here is a chunk of material from a long time ago when we fed the stalk of a Brussels sprout plant, and bits and pieces of it keep falling off, but it is interesting to still see it almost like in its tubular shape. I think it was only just a few check-ins ago that it finally broke open from being its tubular shape. And you know, for a while there we were putting stuff in here that were not only not frozen, but also things that were thought to be materials that would probably take a long time to break down. Then I thought to myself, you know, we don't want to have some sort of a system here that's just chock full of leftovers. So I did abandon that whole idea of the materials being thrown in here being not only not frozen, but also slow composting materials. I just kind of stuck to the whole idea of not frozen. Not that it's all that terribly interesting, but it is just a deviation from what the norm is in most of my worm bin feedings. I mean, I think I'm not alone. I'm pretty sure lots of other people prefer to store their worm food in the freezer, not knowing exactly when they're going to get around to feeding it, and then knowing that it's just going to be preserved pretty much in its original state up until the point in time that you're ready to give it to the worms. And then I think there's also that additional benefit to things getting frozen and then subsequently thawing out. Many things just seem to turn to mush. And I think the best example that always keeps coming to mind is potato. It seems like if you freeze potato skins, peels, whatever, maybe even whole potatoes, if you should be happening to need to compost whole potatoes, if you were to freeze them, throw them in the worm bin, they're going to get consumed pretty quickly. All that yummy starchy goodness. But if you put them in without having been first frozen, they'll sit in there, they'll start trying to grow, they'll take short of forever to finally break down in the worm bin. So I know that there's many other foods that also benefit from sort of getting a jump start on the breakdown process by undergoing that freezing and thawing process. And I don't think it's so much the thawing, I think it's more the freezing. Just as the moisture crystallizes, sort of the same way, you know, water, when it gets into the roadway and freezes, it causes cracks and potholes and everything else. Freezing water has tremendous force and can break through almost anything. So it's not too surprising that when the moisture freezes in the foods that you're going to be giving the worms, that it also causes a good bit of damage right down at the cellular level, molecular level, just based on that simple process of being frozen and thawed. So it seems like I think this was the system where I was just using the old-fashioned method of tearing up strips of newspaper to create the bedding that we would deploy with the feeding. And I guess the downside to doing it that way is that the paper just starts to clump up and stick to each other and gets all matted together. So I'll see if I can sort of just blend it into the surrounding materials rather than allowing it to all stay stuck together. So whatever, I'm just sort of finding myself getting all caught up in what I'm chit-chatting about as I encounter all this matted together newspaper, thinking that it would be nice if it didn't end up matted all together this way when we restore the feeding zone. So I'll see what I could do about doing that, but I'll also see what I could do about getting on with the feeding and not running my mouth on and on over here. So we're just going to open up a little trench into which today's feeding can get positioned, and I'm questioning whether we really want to add bedding. I think I keep bumping into so much of it that it seems like just reusing the existing bedding should be adequate. And in systems that are getting older like this, I almost feel like I'd rather see the worms break down what residual bits of materials that were placed in here as bedding, so that what we're ending up with in the end is a whole bunch of castings, not just a bunch of castings littered with all types of debris. So I think we'll stick to just recycling bedding today and just kind of being in that more stingy mode, which is something I generally do in my older systems. Try to encourage the worms to just focus their energy on doing away with whatever materials had been placed in over the time as bedding, if there's a lot of it remaining. And as you can see, there is quite a bit of it remaining here in this one, in this particular system. So perhaps we'll treat them to bedding at some point in the near future when we decide it's time to start gearing up the system for the harvest of the castings, and maybe we set up a horizontal migration feeding zone for them, which would be made up of largely fresh bedding for them to move over into, evacuating their finished castings. But for now, I think we're just going to be in stingy mode when it comes to the application of bedding. So in goes these chunks of mango peel and the mango seed, which should be interesting to see how those cuts that I put into it help the breakdown process, assuming that they'll help. And then this fairly generous portion of sugar snap peas, I think they might be. I'm not even sure what they are. And I do remember once or twice feeding these in the past, but it's not one of the things that you see getting fed to my worm bins very frequently. But from what I remember, that is a pretty popular item that's probably going to get eaten fairly fast. And to help with the digestion process, I'm adding some of my pulverized eggshell as grit. So we'll use this now, this need to cover up the feeding zone, as our excuse to just sort of go a little further outboard, all the way to the outer edges, to see what's happening, just to bring in material with which we can cover up. At the same time, trying to submerge some of these more dry materials that have been sitting out on the surface, not getting a whole lot of attention, tilling them down into the bed so that they too can experience a little bit of breakdown process rather than being somewhat ignored due to their dryness. And we'll do the same over on this side, and we'll pretty much be done. It does seem like with the humidity in the air that we're having, now that summer is in full force here in central New Jersey, the humidity in the air is allowing my systems to preserve their moisture content quite nicely. So even though we're covering with just a flimsy piece of newspaper or two, the system is certainly keeping on with its moisture content and not seeming to experience too much drying. I mean, the very top surface for sure did have some slightly dry material, but I guess in this case we've got a little bit more protection than just a single sheet of newspaper. At some point not too long ago, we came in with just a second sheet of newspaper, with which just surprisingly, just that little tiny extra bit of protection does seem to be doing the system good in terms of locking in perhaps just enough extra moisture underneath the second piece of paper to keep things quite comfortable and moist and damp, so that the worms can feel comfortable cruising around the entire system. So that's it for our check-in now with these red wigglers and the cork, which was kind of interesting to see, kind of cleaned off, and what it really looks like now. It's really lost a lot of size. Interesting how a whole side of it seems to be missing. And who knows, maybe it'll take another 5 years before the thing's truly gone. I guess we'll see. Alright everyone, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.